Okay, welcome everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order. This is a hearing of the Committee of Adjustment for the Town of Grimsby. I'm going to first introduce the committee members since we've got a screen full here. So if you could just raise your hand. We've got Adam Motorshead, Herb Nobes, Danielle Beck, Dylan Bailey, and myself, Kevin Antonitis. We have two staff with us here this evening, Nancy Simons, the Secretary Treasurer, and we've got the planner, town planner, Walter Basic as well. All right, thank you. So members of the public are advised that our meetings are live streamed by the Town of Grimsby. Individuals and media may be audibly and or visually recorded during this meeting. As a reminder, all electronic devices are to be in silent mode during our committee meeting. For the purposes of the Zoom meeting, applicants will be placed in the waiting room until your application is heard. The purpose of the application and relative correspondence will be heard, following which the applicant will be given an opportunity to address the application. Any person concerned with the application will then be given an opportunity to speak. At the conclusion of this discussion, the committee will render a decision and advise of any applicable decision or conditions. Copies of the decisions will be mailed to the applicant or agent and to any other person who files a written request to the Secretary Treasurer. Any person, corporation, or public body has a right to appeal either the decision itself or the conditions of consent to the local planning appeal tribunal within 20 days of the mailing of the decision for consent application and or 20 days of making the decision for minor variances. Everyone present will be given an opportunity to comment on the applications being heard. Please address your comments and questions through the chair. Agencies commenting on applications may request that certain conditions be imposed. Voicing objections to these conditions will not adversely affect the committee's decision. All members of the committee have viewed the properties on the agenda tonight and are familiar with the lands that are subject of the applications. Are there anyone or any of the committee members have a pecuniary interest with the matters before us this evening? No, and I have none. Are there any requests for withdrawal or adjournment?
No.
No, none. Okay, so there's, you've all seen the agenda. We're just making a slight change to the order that we hear them. So we're going to move the land consent applications B0420 and B0520 after the minor variance A16. So we're just moving the minor variance A1720 for block 230M 458 Slessor Gardens to the last item on the agenda. So that being said, we're going to have the secretary read the application and give us a synopsis of any correspondence that we've received on the application. So we're going to go for the first one. Oh, sorry, the minutes of the previous meeting. I should call for a motion. Resolve that the minutes of the meeting held October 20, 2020 be approved. Do I have a mover or a seconder on that? Adam? Seconder? Dylan? Any discussion on that? All those in favor say aye. Opposed, if any? Was carried. So now the first application this evening is minor variance A1620 409 Wolverton Road. Nancy?
Yes, good evening. So this is file number A16-20, Margot Kindry, 409 Wolverton Road. The proposal is to allow an increase in lot coverage from 10%, which was previously approved by variance A1-09 to 10.7% to accommodate a secondary suite. Also to allow the alteration of the exterior of a dwelling to accommodate the secondary suite, whereas bylaw 14-45 states the exterior appearance of the dwelling is unaltered to accommodate the unit except for replacement basement windows and or changes to accommodate rear basement entries. Correspondence for this application, correspondence from the region of Niagara requesting approval of a septic system. Fire department had no objections and the public works department had no objections.
All right, thank you, Nancy. Are the applicants or their representative here? Would you like to speak at all to the committee or address the reports and correspondence at all?
No, I don't know exactly what to say. The in-law suite is for my parents, so that we can kind of do the whole aging in place. They're super young right now, but we want them to be able to age in place, and so this is what our family decided to do. We do have Chris Adama, who's working. He's actually completed a secondary septic design. So we were told that that's the next step after this, if this is approved. So I spoke with Justin Nort from the region. He was here this week, and so he's aware that that will be forthcoming. So I just got that from Chris Adama this week. So.
Okay. Yeah, you had a question, Nancy?
We should share the presentation. I forgot the
presentation. Yeah. We're just going to share a brief presentation kind of summarizing the application. It's hard to see on the screen, so we're going to do a screen share here.
So this is the location of 409 Wolverton Road. Next slide. This is what the existing house looks like now. Next slide. This is the proposal. This is the east-west elevation. Next slide. And the north-south elevation. Next slide. And the floor plan. The applicant has also submitted pictures of the existing neighborhood in relation to where the secondary suite will be located. This is the neighbor directly across the road. I'm not quite sure if this is to the east or the west. Perhaps Margot can.
South.
South. Thank you. And the next slide. And Margot, what's this?
That would be northwest, I guess.
Northwest.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So back. Okay. So you want to close the slide, please?
All right, I'll open it up to the committee members first. Are there any questions for the applicants? You just have to wave or raise your hand on the function. And is there anyone in the audience? I guess there isn't anybody from the public here this evening then. If not, do I have a motion on this, or a mover and seconder? Maybe I'll just read the motion. Resolve that submission 16-20 regarding 409 Wolverton Road for minor variance from the provision of the bylaws amended to increase the lot coverage from 10% previously approved by variance A109 to 10.7% to accommodate a secondary suite, to allow the alteration of the exterior of a dwelling to accommodate the secondary suite, whereas bylaw 1445 states the exterior appearance of the dwelling is unaltered to accommodate the unit except for the replacement basement windows and or changes to accommodate rear basement entries be approved, subject to the condition that was read in the report that the applicant obtain approval from the Region of Niagara for the private sewage system to accommodate the secondary suite. Do I have a mover and a seconder on that? Herb and Dylan? Any further discussion on this motion? If not, then all those in favor say aye. Just raise your hand. Opposed, if any? Was carried. So as I mentioned at the beginning, there is a 20-day appeal period before it becomes final and binding, but it was approved this evening. So thank you
Is that 20 business days?
Nancy? 20 calendar days.
Okay.
Yeah, 20 calendar days.
Okay. And then I can
from
start
the date.
the next step.
That starts tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
I can go now.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye.
thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, just got to make sure I got the right ones. Okay, so the next applications are, we'll deal with them together. Land consent. So this is the change in the agenda order. B0420 and B0520 a numbered company, 4 Lincoln Ave and 251 Murray Street. Nancy?
Yes, this is application B05-20. The purpose of the application is the subject parcel shown as Part 1 is situated on the south side of the South Service Road and the west side of Murray Street. Parts 1, 251 Murray, and Part 2, 6 Lincoln Avenue are to be retained. Part 3 is to merge with Part 4, 4 Lincoln Avenue. The purpose of the application is to restore a previous lot configuration for 251 Murray and 4 Lincoln Avenue. With respect to correspondence, the region has recommended road widening, which is included in the conditions of consent, and Grimsby Power has no comments. The first slide shows Part 1. Part 1, if you can go back one. So this is the existing house at 251 Murray. Okay, stay there. This shows 251 Murray here. This is 6 Lincoln Avenue. This, I believe, is Part 3, which is going to be merged with Part 4, which is 4 Lincoln Avenue. Next slide. Oh. So this slide shows a little better configuration of what's going to happen there. Here you can see 6 Lincoln Avenue. This is Part 3, which is going to be the side yard merging with Part 4. So this is Part 4. Next slide. And I think that's it.
All right, Mr. Wolf, are you here representing the owners? Would you like to speak or address the committee at all? You're still on mute. John, you're still on mute.
There.
There you
Okay. All right. Thank you, members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity. Application B04 has to be granted before B05 is even an issue. I'm wondering if we should really go back to B04. Part 3 has to merge with Part 4, and then we're trying to separate, and that eliminates the encroachment. And then 3 and 4 is to be severed from Part 1. So I'm wondering if we got.
We are doing it in that order, though. We're dealing with
No, you did.
B04 first.
No,
Well, I think so.
251.
No, I know the commentary was about 251.
No, he's talking about 4 Lincoln Avenue.
Yeah, I'm sort of thinking we have to put 3 and 4 together before we take 3 and 4 away from Part 1.
Okay. Sorry, John, I meant in terms of dealing with both at the same time, I meant the discussion and the presentation, but the motions will be dealt with in that order, B04 first. And then I just didn't want to deal with the entire discussion and presentation and go back to the beginning and do it all over again.
Right.
What's essentially the same development. So sorry for misleading you there.
Oh, no problem, no problem. I'm good to go. Well, with respect to the B04 and the removing the encroachment, I think that's good for everyone. The minor variances, there's no objection to that for the what would that be, 3 and 4 and 2, because 2 changed the size, 3 and 4 becomes a new size, so we're good to go. I take it another condition would be that Part 3 must merge with Part 4 and not stand alone.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's in here too, as a condition. Yeah, that's in here too as a condition. It was in the application.
Okay, that's fine.
Correct.
And then a bit of history. The part 1 and part 4, and at that time we didn't know about the encroachment when they were purchased. Part 1 and part 4 were separate properties held by separate corporations. Then the owner did a corporate amalgamation, and by inadvertence, oversight, or otherwise, the same corporation, after the amalgamation of the two separate owners, part 1 and part 4 became owned under common ownership. So it's really, in some ways, we're trying to restore the previous status quo with the improvement of removing the encroachment. So then if you look at the conditions on B05, I think the second condition is identical to the condition that is going to be imposed on parts 3 and 4 in removing the encroachment and merging those two parcels. So I don't think Mr. Basic's second condition need be repeated, because we can't even get to this severance unless we've successfully accomplished the first severance. Then the minor variance for part 1, it's the identical parcel of land that we had before the inadvertent merging through the corporate amalgamation. It's identical, nothing has changed. And if it was legal non-conforming then, the submission is it would be legal non-conforming now. And therefore the condition about the retained lot receiving a minor variance, I mean, it was good then, it should be good now. And if it's not, then the town could appeal about the absence of a condition. And those would be the submissions.
Walter, did you have any response to that? The last comment about the minor variance for part 1?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, the act of merging the parcels, part 1 with part 4, created a different lot area. So the intent of the condition is to now, through the act of this particular consent application, again, we would, although it's what it used to be, it is different from what it is now, from what it is currently. So a variance would be required. It lost its legal non-conforming status when it changed.
Does that make sense to you, John?
Oh, as a technical matter, sure, it changed. Well, there is a doctrine of patrians patriae, which is where the government folk reach down and help out its citizens. We admit there was an inadvertent merger. And this inadvertence is now taking us down a path of further applications, minor variances, and conditions on minor variances, and so on, which would be contrary to the doctrine of patrians patriae, in my respectful submission. But of course, the learned committee will make its decision as it sees fit.
That's what we're here for, to help you.
Oh, the doctrine applies. Great.
Exactly.
Thanks so much. I do understand technically it's a different lot when it merged, but that was absolutely 100% inadvertent. And the Planning Act does use the words in a different context, of course. It remains the identical parcel of land.
So a question for you, John, why would you not apply for the minor variances at the same time? Like we often see severances with a minor variance and we deal with them in the order on the agenda, just out of curiosity. I mean, according to Walter, you can apply for both at the same time, one and the minor variances, but just out of curiosity, because this effectively wouldn't come into effect if the condition isn't met, right, for the variance. Walter, you want to?
Yeah, if there's a concern that there would be an extra application required for part 1, you need not fear. We would accept one application for the variance for part 1 and for the variance for part 2 because they are still one parcel of land.
Well, no, but we got a severance if the consent's
If it's,
granted.
if it's conditionally approved,
Right.
that condition will have to be cleared within a year. So you'll have a year to obtain a variance. Obtain a variance, and within that, until the severance is finalized, they still are technically one lot, parts 1 and 4, and merged with part 3 for that matter. Then we can consider the variances that you would apply for under one application. So you wouldn't need to make a second application for part 1 and the first one for part 4, or combined parts 3 and 4. You would accept one application.
One application for this whole.
For the whole thing.
All
So
right.
actually it would be 2 applications. One application would be for part 1. No, not part 1.
Parts 2 and 3 and 4.
Part 2 would be one application.
Right.
And combined parts 3, 4, and 1 would be a second application.
I got you.
Okay, so a third application would not be necessary, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
If it's a concern you had.
Now back to the chairman's question. Hello?
Yep.
Okay, I can't see you, but that's okay. Well, if the conditions were too onerous, the applicant always has has the option of abandoning the consent application. And then in this case, of course, it won't happen because we would then have to fend off the violation of having 2 dwelling houses on one lot. It can get absurd. And I just, we will abide by the conditions, but it is frustrating, I must say.
Okay, are there any other questions from the committee members? Now that we're all confused.
Oh, that's perfect.
Nobody? All right, let's call for a motion then. The first one. So we'll deal with them in order. Resolve that submission B04-24 Lincoln Avenue by the numbered company, which is with the subject parcel shown as parts 1 to 5, situated on the north side of Lincoln Avenue. Part 1, 251 Murray, and Part 2, 6 Lincoln Avenue, RB2 retained, and Part 3 to merge with Part 4, 4 Lincoln Avenue, which is to restore the previous lot configuration for 251 Murray and 4 Lincoln Avenue. So the recommendation or the motion is that it be approved subject to the following conditions. The standard ones regarding the triplicate deeds, the certification fee, that the conditions of consent be fulfilled with 1 year. That's the variances. And subsection 3 or 5 of section 50 of the Planning Act shall apply to any subsequent conveyance or transaction involving the severed land, and that the retained parcel part 2 obtain a minor variance approval for a minimum lot area, minimum lot frontage, and minimum interior side yard setback on the east side. Any further discussion on this motion? All those in favor say aye. We can't see all the hands here, sorry. Adam, Herb, Dylan. Opposed, if any? Was carried. Did I get a motion? Oh, sorry, that's why I was jumping
I think
ahead.
that's why we were confused.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's why.
It wasn't a motion.
That was my fault. John, you got me all confused here.
Oh,
So a mover or a seconder. Let's back up the train here. There we go. Danielle, move. Seconder, Dylan. Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye. Now that was easier. A lot better. Opposed, if any? Carried. And then the next application, then B0520 251 Murray by the numbered company be approved subject to the following conditions. So this application is for, just to be clear, 251 Murray. So the subject parcel shown as part 1 on the south side of the South Service Road and west side of Murray. Parts 1, 251 Murray, and part 2, 6 Lincoln Avenue are to be retained. Part 3 to merge with part 4. And again, the purpose is to restore the previous lot configuration on 251 Murray and 4 Lincoln. And that the conditions recommended are as follows: the standard condition regarding the deeds, the final certification fee, the conditions of consent be fulfilled with 1 year of the notice of the decision, and subsection 3 or 5 of section 50 shall apply to any subsequent conveyance or transaction involving severed land, and that the retained parcel part 1 obtain a minor variance approval for the minimum lot area. Also, that the combined part 3 and 4 obtain a minor variance for the minimum lot area, frontage, and minimum side yard on the west side, and that the applicant gratuitously grant a 2.59 meter widening on the west side and a 3.08 meter widening on the east side of the frontage of the South Service Road.
I'm sorry.
Do I have a mover on that?
2.59 on which?
2.59 on the west side and 3.08 meters on the east side of the frontage on the South Service Road. We never really talked about that, or you didn't have any questions, but I'll just call for the motion and we can discuss it further if you'd like, or if you have questions on it. Herb, you had a question, or are you moving it?
I didn't see that in any of the.
I have a question.
Okay.
Yes, you're saying they're asking for a widening on the west side of the property of part 1?
Maybe we can get the map. Walter's going to respond to that.
For part
We're
1.
just going to get the map up for a minute. So this is the region's request.
The first one was good, the previous one. And if you could zoom into the left image. There we go. Okay. So it's not 2 separate widenings, it's 1 widening, and it's going to be a straight line that's measured 2.59 meters. Could everybody turn their microphones off? I'm hearing myself. Thank you. Sorry for that. Yeah, the widening would be measured at the northwest corner of the lot. If you go south, 0.59 meters and to a point, and then from the northeast corner of the lot, approximately 3 meters south, and then a straight line connecting the 2 points right across the entire frontage abutting the South Service Road. So the reason they describe it that way is because the widening is required to meet a minimum width measured from the center line of the road. And since the road width is varied, the actual the new lot line won't be parallel to the existing lot line. Basically, it's a little bit, the widening is a little bit wider on the east side than it is on the west side, but they're not 2 separate widenings. That's it.
Okay, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Herb?
Who's requesting this widening?
I'm assuming it's the region?
The region of Niagara.
The region of Niagara.
Have they provided us with any documentation, any written request for this?
Yes.
Yeah, it's in I thought it was in the package.
Mhm.
I didn't see it.
It was in the package from a Lindsay Earl, I believe. Regional staff offer no objection to the consent application, but we do have a regional interest in the future site plan application on this property, Murray Street, from a technical, road widening, and urban design perspective. So I'm assuming that's where you've got the dimensions from that request, from that individual?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, but that does not state the size of the widening, and it's indicating that they would look for it in the future.
But this is their opportunity during a severance process, is the opportunity to obtain that widening.
well, I respectfully agree with Mr. Nobes that the future owner can deal with the region as the region and the future owner see fit. It's tantamount to an expropriation. We'd be better off. We'd be better off under the Expropriations Act. We'd get compensation. Like this.
That's not a typical or an untypical request, though. It's site plan or severance stage, but I'm going to let Walter answer that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Under the Planning Act, a municipality has the right to obtain a road allowance widening to accommodate future needs of the municipality if it's identified in the official plan. Actually, for consent applications, it's not required in their official plan, but for site plan application, it is required to be under their official plan. They can require it as a condition of severance.
I'm sorry, there was.
It is a provision in the Planning Act that permits municipalities to acquire road allowance widenings at no cost to the municipality.
As part of a consent application.
That is correct.
We've seen it a number of times as part of the site or consent application
Oh, I know.
process. And I agree with you. It's who goes first. If the applicant's going for a severance or a site plan, they give it up free. If the municipality or the region is going for a road project that requires the land, they go first, they pay you. But unfortunately, in this case, your owner has gone first, and he's caught in the process where he's required to give it up gratis. Now, I didn't see I agree with Herb. There's no defined area in here. But I'm assuming that either Nancy or Walter got the actual dimensions and shape and configuration that's in some other document. Nancy?
Yes, pretty.
Nancy, sorry, you're muted the whole time. We can't hear what you're saying.
Sorry. That was part of the pre-consultation that the region did with staff, and then they submitted written comments from the pre-consultation.
Well, I don't recall the actual dimensions being discussed at the pre-consultation. Mm-hmm. And I could be wrong, but truly I had no commentary tonight because I didn't know this was coming my way. I knew the subject might be coming my way, but not the actual dimensions.
Mr. Chair, just the sounds like the region just indicated that they would be looking for it in a future time and that they're not requesting it at this application. And any correspondence from the region requesting the dimensions of the widening, and that should be brought to the Committee of Adjustment. It shouldn't be going through the zoning or planning department to be added to the requirement after during the presentation. It should be sent to the committee and we review it along with this at the time of the meeting. That's all. And I don't think it's intended to be done at this time by the region. And they have not provided us with the dimensions that are stipulated in this condition.
Walter, did you?
Could you elaborate, Nancy, where that
Yes, that was in a separate memo from the region after the pre-consultation. I believe it was sent to Mr. Wolf. I can double check that to confirm. But that was my understanding that they did submit comments to him.
Yeah, as I say, I recall the topic. I don't recall the dimensions, but and I could be wrong. But
Yeah, I can answer that.
but again, it if it wasn't brought again with Mr. Nobe's point, just accepting it as a fact and including it as a condition, it escaped your own consideration.
Walter, you had a comment?
No, Walter considered it, but you folks didn't consider it.
No, he's responding to some, he was raising his hand to speak, so.
Okay.
Self unmuted. And here. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The correspondence that was provided in the agenda states that regional staff provided comments at the pre-con on September 17th, 2020 for consent. Regional staff offer no objections to the consent application, but we do have regional interest in the future site plan application on this property, Murray Street, from the technical road widening and urban design perspective. So he is correct. They still have an opportunity to obtain the road allowance widening if there are any future site plan applications on the property. So the Land Division Committee can consider it now, or we can require that the future applicant for any site plan on Part 1 provide the road allowance widening to the region as a condition of site plan. So it's up to the committee. The region does have the option of collecting it now or collecting it later. But in the region's correspondence here to the Secretary Treasurer, they indicate that they can collect it later.
Thank you, Mr. Basic.
So it's up to the committee.
Thank you, Walter.
Thank you.
Herb,
Mr.
you had a
Chair.
question? Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. So this request was sent to the Secretary Treasurer saying that it could be taken at a later date at site plan. I don't have that correspondence as part of this package. Any correspondence that comes to the committee on an application is supposed to be submitted
I have it.
to the committee. I don't have it.
I've got, it's in the agenda package.
It's an email from Mr. Lindsay.
It's in the agenda package near the, after this application, and it's a photocopy of, or an attachment, which was an email, as is many of the responses that they get from various agencies. Sometimes they're just one-liners, sometimes there are a few lines. For example, the comments back from Niagara Power on the next page is just a one-liner saying we have no comments. So it was part of the package. I don't know if anybody else has it or missed it, or. But yeah, there is one more chance. I would agree. In this case, it seems a little ambiguous that it's not specified in there, but it is a standard condition that we've had for severances where the municipality or the region requires it. I guess in this case, like to Walter's point, there's another chance to get a widening when and if they need it at site plan stage. So if it's the committee's will, I mean, the other option is if we approve it with that condition, the applicant can appeal that condition.
Right. The person doing the development is the person that will be trying to bring it under the new prestige zoning and all that sort of stuff. So they're prepared to deal with all the issues of remaking the property. We're not remaking the property. It's being sold as is. So it's disturbing that there be this taking against the current owner when the benefit goes to the future owners.
Right.
And the future owners will be in your offices for many times for many hours to make some arrangement with you regarding the development.
Yeah. Well, it's it's not a problem to remove if that's the committee's desire. So right now we have I was reading through the motion. We don't have a mover and a seconder, but we can make that suggestion, or whoever moves it can make the suggestion that that last condition, number 7, be removed. And because we don't have a mover or seconder, so whoever does that can do it at that time. Any other questions before I ask for a motion? Danielle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Herb that unless we have specific correspondence stating on what the road widening numbers are supposed to be, or some type of plan, I don't feel comfortable supporting or putting a motion forward for an application unless we know the specifics of the conditions. So when the time is right, after other members possibly have questions or comments, I'd be willing to put a motion forward to approve it without the condition of the road widening for this application. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Is there anyone else? Okay, we'll ask for a mover and a seconder at this time. So if you'd like to make that motion at this time, Danielle, you can, without
Yes,
that condition number 7 be removed. So
That is correct. Yes, I would like to put the motion forward to approve the application without condition number, just double checking here, number 7, correct, yes.
okay, and the seconder for that amended motion then, Herb?
Just to be clear, is number 7 the road widening? condition?
Correct.
Thank you. Yeah.
Any further questions then on the motion as amended? All those in favor say aye on the amended motion. Opposed, if any? Was carried. So there is a 20-day appeal period before it becomes final and binding, but it was approved with that condition removed then, John.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good fortune.
Have a
for
good
all of you.
evening.
You as well.
Good night.
Good night.
So they're all in. Is everybody in? Okay, so we have everybody in for the last application this evening. So we have a minor variance request A17-20, Block 2, Plan 30M-458, Slessor Gardens. Nancy, would you like to read the application and any correspondence we've had?
Yes, so this application is 17-20. It's the applicant is AG Construction. The application is to facilitate the construction of 3-story stacked townhouse dwellings on the subject lands. The application is currently undergoing site plan review. The first variance is for the front yard setback of 3.70 meters, whereas 4.50 meters is required. The driveway width is 6.0 meters, whereas 7.5 meters is required. And the applicant is also asking for clarification of wording. He's asking that the clarification be changed to stacked townhouse dwellings shall be subject to all site-specific provisions listed under exception 314 bylaw 16-47 to zoning bylaw 14-45, whereas currently it states a stacked townhouse dwelling shall be subject to the same regulations as in the RM1 zone. I believe the applicant is here this evening, Mr. Weeks, and he's going to make the presentation.
Yes, hi Nancy, I am here, although my colleague Steve Fraser will actually be giving the presentation, and he's also in the room.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Stephen Fraser. I'm a registered professional planner with AJ Clark and Associates in Hamilton. Thanks, Nancy, for introducing the variance application before you. I've reviewed staff's report and the recommendations contained within that report for approval of the variances as laid out by town staff. And I also appreciate the level of analysis and detail that staff has provided in their staff report. But I'm hoping to indulge the committee with a little extra time to hopefully clarify exactly what's gone on here, because at the end of the day, this is really just a what I'll refer to as a technical fix of a zoning bylaw amendment that was approved on a site-specific basis by town council to implement exactly what we're trying to do here effectively. So this slide here illustrates that the subject lands are part of a registered plan of subdivision. So this subdivision comprised block 1, which is the blue shaded parcel, as well as the extension of Niagara Street to Slessor Boulevard, and block 2, which is our subject lands. This slide indicates what the existing zoning is on the subject land. So you can see in this slide, the 4th column over to the right, the property is zoned an RM2, which permits apartment buildings, and it is also has an exception to the site-specific zoning that allows for a number of site-specific regulations or provisions to the property. So if you look at the right column here, this is the section of the zoning bylaw that spells out the existing permissions that the site has for an apartment building. And if we look now at the middle or the 5th column over from the right, it's evident there that at the time the zoning bylaw was being passed, the introduction of a stacked townhouse dwelling was being contemplated. And the reason why I know this is because I was the planner retained on the file when I carried out the draft plan approval of the subdivision, as well as the zoning approval for this property. So I certainly have the background on it. I won't go into each and every one of those existing permissions for the apartment building on the right, but I will speak to them a little bit later in a bit more detail. So it's very important for this committee to understand that when we were presenting our zoning bylaw amendment to town council, we had 2 land uses or built forms introduced to council to illustrate what we would potentially be doing on the property. So you'll see here, again, the site is a high density residential designation in the town's official plan. So an apartment building is an appropriate use. And that's not what we're here to talk about, but it's important for context. So this, when we were getting the zoning approved, this particular concept was introduced. And you can see that I wish I had control of this, but the line on the right-hand side of the image is where Niagara Street Extension is. And then the line at the bottom of that image is where Slessor Boulevard is. And so from a technical perspective, that Niagara Street Extension portion is the front yard. And alternatively, the back portion opposite to it is the rear yard. And the side lot line that runs parallel to Slessor Boulevard would be our external side yard. And the reason why I'm just raising that for the committee is it's very important. You can clearly see that when we were suggesting a 4-story apartment through the zoning process, we had reduced setbacks to that exterior side yard. We had reduced rear yard setbacks. We had reduced setbacks to the hypotenuse of the daylight triangle, all of which were in that list that I just showed you in that site-specific zoning. They exist today and permit a 4-story building to be there today. So that proposal was for 18 residential units. We could go to the next slide, please. This was a secondary apartment concept that we had. And you can see that dashed line that is running basically adjacent to those 2 street lines that I referred to, very consistent with concept 1, a reduced side yard, exterior side yard, a reduced front yard, reduced rear yard, etc. and we're proposing at that time 24 residential units, which again, the zoning permits today. The next two slides are the critical one that I hope explain the situation that's transpired. So again, keep in mind, these were introduced to town council when we were getting our zoning approved for the subject site. And it is very clear that the intent of the setbacks that you see on these concepts is very similar, almost identical to the apartments that I just went through, the two concepts that I just went through. We've got reduced exterior side yards, a reduced rear yard, etc. All those provisions that we got approved for the apartment, they simply just did not translate to this particular use. Next slide, please. Again, this is the secondary stacked townhouse proposal that we put forth. Again, I don't need to belabor it, but it's almost identical to the apartment buildings in terms of its relationship to the street line, rear lot line, etc. So again, to be clear, the intent when we were getting our zoning approved was to not only allow for the apartment dwellings that are currently permitted in the RM2, but to add that stacked townhouse use into the RM2 zone because it's not a permitted use in the RM2 zone. And therein lies the problem, which I'll come back to. So this is the proposal that's currently submitted with the town for site plan approval. It's actually a 2-story, 14-unit residential building, and it's a stacked townhouse type of building. And you can see that, you know, the relationship again to this building envelope, to Niagara Street, to Slessor Boulevard, very consistent to what we were proposing when we were getting our site-specific zoning approved. Next slide, please, Nancy. Maybe we could skip through these charts and just go to the one image that has a red and a blue image on it, if I could. So the next slide, please. The last one. Okay, so this is a very simplistic but very telling image. So the blue outline that you see is a apartment building envelope as permitted today, as of right. Zoning complies with zoning entirely based on our site-specific zoning. What we are proposing is the red. So you can clearly see what we're proposing is inside the envelope of the permitted setbacks and regulations that we got approved through council through our site-specific zoning bylaw. We are simply asking the committee, because the stacked townhouses did not get recognized in those site-specific provisions through the zoning process, to allow for a stacked townhouse to have those exact same setbacks and regulations that are available to the apartment today. So the last thing I'd like to pull up, Nancy, if I could, just before I go into my conclusion, would just be Walter's, if we have the staff report handy, just the chart Walter prepared as part of that staff report.
We're just looking for it now.
Sure.
It's page 19 of the agenda, if that's helpful at all.
Okay, Nancy's found it. She's just going to put it on the screen here for a minute.
Okay, great, thank you. Excellent. Thank you. So what I want to highlight here, more so than what was approved for an apartment building in terms of the site-specific zoning changes in this column here, the third column from the right, is the regulations for a stacked townhouse in the RM1 zone. And the reason why I want to highlight that is because the ability to meet any of those provisions is almost impossible by implementing a proposal that was contemplated at the zoning stage. So in other words, the site-specific changes to the zoning bylaw allowed for these regulations to be amended to the RM2 zone, which only permits an apartment building. It was not intended that it omit a street townhouse from those same regulations. And I know, again, Walter provided a very detailed explanation in the staff report, and that's very helpful, I hope, to the committee. But it's as simplistic as allowing, all we're requesting of committee effectively is allowing the same provisions in the site specific that we have for an apartment to apply to the stacked townhouses. That's my submissions, Mr. Chairman, and in my opinion, it does certainly meets the 4 tests of the Planning Act, is in conformity with the town's official plan, and it is representing good planning because it meets the vision of that official plan. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Steve. Are there any questions from the committee members then first? So it's a little complicated or very complicated variance report compared to what we're used to seeing. So maybe, are there any other questions first of Walter or staff regarding the report that was submitted? Because it was a lengthy report and there was some confusion, I think, as to what was being applied for. But does anyone have any questions? Danielle?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Probably, I guess, to staff, Mr. Basic, why is there such, I guess, a difference between the staff analysis and the planning report provided and the variances that are requested by the applicant? Just as a committee member, it's very confusing to see an analysis of variances that weren't proposed and not a full analysis of variances that were proposed by the applicant. So I'm not too sure what committee is going to be approving, if we're going to be approving the application, what variances would be approved.
Walter?
Thank you, Ms. Beck. Through you, Mr. Chair. Could we go back to the chart, please? Show it on the screen. Thank you. So again, to answer the question, I don't want to speak for the applicant, but I think the applicant's intent was to try to simplify. And maybe Steve can speak to that after I'm done, to simplify the proposal before the committee. I'm sorry?
Sorry, Walter, you were just breaking up during some of that. We might have missed some of what you were saying.
Yeah, I agree. You might have to start over, Walter. It sounded a little staticky. So
Okay.
Sorry.
All right.
sorry about that.
That's okay. Again, what I was trying to say is that I don't want to speak for Mr. Fraser, but I believe the intent of the application, the way it was worded, was to try to simplify the proposal as much as possible. Not coming through.
That's better. Just get crackly again.
Is it my headset?
No, sounds better now.
Sounds better now? Okay. The intent of the application of the applicant, I believe, was to simplify the application as much as possible. In essence, to say that the regulations that apply to, as Mr. Fraser had indicated, the regulations that apply to the apartment building on the site, it's their intent to apply those same regulations to to a stacked townhouse dwelling. The zoning that's currently in place is basically states that the regulations within the existing RM1 zone should apply for stacked townhouse dwellings on this particular property. That's the last clause in the site-specific provision 314. What we attempted to do is, because we're applying, the intent is to apply new regulations or different regulations to stacked townhouse dwellings. What we attempted to do in our presentation to the committee through the memo was to illustrate what the differences are between the existing regulations, which is column C, the proposed regulations, which is column, or the requested variances or requested provisions, which is column E, and the proposed development, which is column F. So what we attempted to illustrate is that although they were requesting variances or requesting provisions for lot area, lot coverage, lot frontage, front yard, exterior side yard, interior side yard, basically all of the provisions that are in 314, what we attempted to illustrate is that only the ones that are highlighted in yellow are actually necessary for the particular site. We didn't get into any analysis in terms of applying the 4 tests to the ones that are shaded blue, because they meet all of the requirements in the ones that are shaded blue. So the analysis that we provided was to illustrate to the committee what the effect of the proposed variances are in detail, as opposed to in simplistic terms, as Mr. Fraser had indicated. So we did an analysis for lot coverage, front yard, exterior side yard, distance to the hypotenuse, rear yard, separation between driveway and the intersection, minimum setback for covered parking, and permitted driveway width. So that's the analysis we provided, because those are the actual numbers that are less or different than, that don't meet the requirements of the existing zoning regulations. So that was the reason for the analysis that we provided in the way we provided, so you would understand specifically what is being asked for. And I hope that answers your question.
Sorry, through the chair, I think it mostly does. So thank you for that explanation. I do appreciate it. Then as the way that the applicant has applied for the variances, variance then number 3 with the clarification, if the committee approves it, essentially what we would be approving is the yellow boxes on the chart in front of us. Is that correct?
You would be approving, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, you would be approving the requested provisions, which is column E.
Okay.
If I may,
Any further questions, Danielle?
Mr.
Sorry.
Chairman, may I?
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to provide a little clarification to that. It's sounding, in my opinion, a little misleading to say we're asking for requested provisions. We're asking to apply existing provisions to a zoning bylaw that's in place, passed by council. That zoning bylaw is column E. Okay, all we're asking for is that the land use of a stacked townhouse inherit those regulations, just for clarification.
Yes.
So that's correct, Walter, then?
Yes. That's right. Yeah.
I think that's where some of the confusion came about, is that it looked like only 3, but by approving, as you said, by approving the clarification of the wording, so in other words, the 3rd variance there on the front page of Walter's report kind of not opens up, but introduces minor variances in that list on the next column. But the overall cause and effect is to allow a development that was anticipated, contemplated, if you will, by council? I had some general questions, maybe. What would and I missed those in the presentation. What were the number of units that were proposed under the two apartment scenarios? In other words, what were the densities proposed in those 2 or 3 options you showed at the beginning versus what you're proposing now, i.e., I think this was 14 in total stacked towns. What were the other scenarios? What were the densities proposed there? I didn't catch those. Maybe I missed that in there.
So, Mr. Chairman, the density provision that's permitted in the existing zoning allows for 120 units per hectare, which in that apartment, the 2 apartment scenarios, you had 18 units and 24 units respectively. So at a reduction of 10 and a reduction of 4 from what's currently being proposed. The current proposal is just over 96 units per hectare. So it's well within the density provision.
And I don't recall seeing it. Is it underground parking then? Is it a driveway? Sorry, is it a driveway leading to underground parking for the stacked towns as well?
Yes, that's correct. All of the parking that's being provided for the site is within the building, within the basement of the building.
Sorry to interrupt. Does anybody else have any questions? Herb, you had a question?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Just to be clear, on this column that we have here, column F is what the building you're proposing is, you're looking at building to. Is that correct? Steve?
Through the chair, that is correct.
Okay. So the present zoning on this property as it sits right now is column E. Is that correct, Walter?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the present zoning on the site is column E for apartment buildings, and it's column C for stacked townhouses.
Okay, so the existing zoning right now is column C. That's what you're proposing. Is that correct, Steve?
Through the chair, no. This is where the confusion, I'm sure, is lying. It's the answer to the question is yes and no. The existing zoning is column E. There's no question about it. We are an RM2 exception 314 zone, permits apartment buildings, permits all those regulations that you see in column E. The issue is that site-specific zoning change did not include the same provisions for a stacked townhouse. So it reverts to what I refer to as the parent regulations of the RM1 zone that don't work for the site and never were contemplated through the zoning process. It was just a clerical error.
So to summarize then for the simple ones among us here, including myself, you're asking us to evaluate the proposed development for 14 stacked townhouses, which would be in a built form as identified under column F. In other words, it would have all those attributes in column F. You want it to be, in a sense, evaluated against column E versus column C. So you want us to kind of move our view of what's minor and so on appropriate for development, compare it to column E instead of C. Is that correct? Is that kind of a simple version of it?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's a very simple version of it. And I really want this committee to understand the as of right permissions that this property has for an apartment building, okay, which is column E. It's very critical because that comes into the test of minor. It comes into the test of, does it meet the zoning? It is the zoning. All I'm suggesting is that the bylaw did not contemplate, which it should have, in my opinion, the stacked townhouse use to have the same regulations as the apartment use in column E and their provisions.
I think Adam had his hand up. Adam, did you have a question?
Can you hear me okay? Yeah, just the applicant, you referred to this as a clerical error. This bylaw was passed in 2016. I'm just wondering when you actually discovered the error.
Through the chair, that's a great question. To be honest with you, through the site plan process, when we got our first round of comments from town staff on the site plan, you'll notice, and when I was giving my presentation, I highlighted the one column in the actual zoning bylaw itself that has as a permitted use stacked townhouses. Well, that last bullet in the far right column of the actual bylaw, when we were getting approval, was not front and center. So it created a problem when we were going to try to implement the zoning, because we cannot implement the zoning based on the RM1 provisions. And so we're here before you today.
Okay, thanks. Because I just kind of went back into the file on this one, and it was in June 30th, 2016. There was a planning report on the development. It was just mentioning the apartments, nothing but stacked townhouses. And there was an email from, I'm not sure he's still with your firm or not, Benjamin Clare on June 29th, asking for some clarifications and I guess inclusions in the draft bylaw that was before the development committee. And one of them was, where is it here? Site-specific 3, please add stacked townhouses as an additional permitted use in accordance with our March 17th, 2016 submission. And the motion that was passed at the planning committee stated, it says, subject to amendment that permits stacked townhouses subject to the regulations of the RM1 zone. So that actually was forwarded on to council and passed then. And so my question is, why weren't the objections raised then? Because the, sorry, what was it here? Come look at my notes. Sorry, the scribbles here. Yeah, basically, why was it not brought up at that time? Because you're saying it was a clerical error, but I would have thought that there would have been some review of that at that point.
Yeah, through the chair to the committee member, that's a great point, and maybe clerical error is the wrong term, but the stacked townhouse use was the intent of what was on the table when we were trying to get the additional zoning approved. We were never, ever, contemplating including provisions of the stacked townhouse regulations, because they did not work for the subject property. And that's why I showed this committee those concepts that we prepared when we were getting our zoning approved. Maybe human error is the right term instead of clerical error, but I assure you that being part of that process, the intent of what we were trying to achieve was having both uses subject to the same provisions. Having otherwise is kind of an illogical exercise. So I get your point. Maybe clerical error is wrong, human error is right, and here we are trying to rectify, what was done in 2016 and what is appropriate.
Adam? Yeah.
Just actually maybe to planning, maybe they can clarify why the request originally from Mr. Benjamin Clare was, like I said, just stacked townhouses, and the RM1 zoning regulations requirement was added. I'm just not sure what discussions went on in regards to that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't recall the background, and I think it would follow if you try to remember 4 years back. However, I think I'll stand on my memo to the committee, I think this is a good development. I think it's appropriate for the site. And as the memo that we submitted to the committee indicates, we feel that it satisfies the tests required for a committee of adjustment approval, and I'll have to stand by that.
Anybody? Sorry, Adam, did you have a question, or did you, Danielle, you had your hand up, or you went off mute, so I just assumed you were going to ask something. Adam?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. Yeah, basically, I don't know. I have issues with this, the way that this application was brought forward. It's sort of 3 variances, but once you look under the hood of number 3, to me, in effect, it's rewriting half of the zoning bylaw amendment that was passed in 2016.
Are there any other questions from the committee members? I have one for Nancy. Were there any written and or other comments from adjacent landowners that would be most affected from this application in the circulation of the minor variance request this evening?
Through the chair. No, there were none.
Dylan?
Just a question for, I'm not sure through you, Mr. Chair, but building on on Adam's point, I mean, what effects does this have on precedent for the zoning bylaw? So I'm just saying, we pass these variances, and then are others that then affect potentially for other developments, they would have to bring the same variances forward. So I guess, and I apologize for sort of my newness on the committee, but, we're passing these things, which, obviously they are, variances to a bylaw, but if we're amending wholesale various provisions of them, I'm not sure the implications for, for other developments, even if there are any.
I'll have Walter answer that for you, Dylan. Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Member Bailey, to answer your question, each application is reviewed on its own merits. This application is only for this site, so there would be no precedent set for any future applications.
And I think for further clarification too, Dylan, we get that request or comment a lot of times, and that's why I guess there's a part of the process of obtaining a minor variance is a public process. So it allows input from neighbors that would be most affected by this, and also allows staff to comment on every application, other agencies, and council, if they'd like, also get copies of our decision, and would be council is a separate body from us. So they would also be able to appeal a decision that we make if they're not happy with this or feel it wasn't or goes beyond the intent of what was anticipated for a development such as this at the time. So they're also can be a party to an appeal. So I hear your point, and it's a valid one, but there is a process set up that we're independent and there is a public process for input from staff and the public on each application. And we're not bound by other decisions because every property is unique and every development is unique. So I don't know if that helps. Danielle, sorry, did you have your hand up? No? Okay. Any other comments or questions from the committee members? And there's no one in the audience or in the public that's in front of us this evening. Then do I have a motion on this application? I'm going to have to find it here. Bear with me. So the motion is resolved that submission A17-2 for block 230M-458 Slusser Garden subdivision for a minor variance from the provision of bylaw 1445 RM2, site-specific bylaw 1647, exception 314 for a front yard setback of 3.7 meter, where 4.5 meters is required, for a driveway width of 6 meters, where 7.5 is required, and for clarification of wording, stacked townhouse dwellings shall be subject to all site-specific provisions listed under exception 314 to zoning bylaw 1445, whereas the current wording is a stacked townhouse dwelling shall be subject to the same regulations as in the RM1 zone, be approved. Do I have a mover and a seconder on this motion? Herb?
Mr. Chair, just a comment on it. The item 3 says clarification of the wording. So has through your Mr. Chair to Steve, has the clarification been established for this wording?
Through the chair, yes, because again, not to belabor it, but those site-specific provisions that you saw in that column, they exist on the zoning. Effectively, we're asking for that use to be added into those site-specific provisions, which the Planning Act allows for through Section 45. So I'm, yes, comfortable with that wording. Thank you.
Okay,
Okay, go ahead.
So item 3 has been clarified. That's all I'm trying to get.
Right. So my kind of picking up on that, Herb, then, so my question to staff or to Walter would be, with the approval of this, if it gets approved, these 3 variances, the 2 specific and the third an interpretation, as we just discussed, could the applicant come for a building permit and site plan approval tomorrow, so to speak, or after the 20-day appeal period, and be successful in meeting all the zoning requirements with these amendments?
Chair. Yes, subject to site plan approval, obviously.
Does that help, Herb, what you meant? Or the cause and effect of it, I guess.
Yes, the item 3 was just to clarify it. It had nothing to do with what was in those provisions. It was just clarifying the wording in there.
Right.
It doesn't say that it's applicable to this or that there's exemptions for this. It's just the clarification of the words. And that's what was item 3. And I think that the clarification has been done already through this process.
Right, agreed. So were you moving that, Herb, or were you just having a question on this? I don't have a mover and a seconder yet.
I'm just making a statement
Okay,
on it, so that item 3 is already resolved. From my understanding anyhow, if I can be corrected that it hasn't been resolved. The developer seems to be resolved that the wording has been clarified, and the planning department is satisfied that the wording has been clarified.
yeah, it'll be resolved with approval of this application. Okay, so then back to my original request, do I have a mover and a seconder on this application, on this motion, sorry? Herb, move, seconder? Danielle? Any further discussion on this matter? All those in favor say aye. Opposed, if any? Was carried. So there is a 20-day appeal period, I'm sure you're aware of as well, Steve, before it becomes final and binding.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And that's all we have this evening. Thank you again for attending. Good evening.